Some of you who are familiar or more familiar with my preaching know that sometimes the title on Tuesday isn't the title they end up using on Sunday. So forget the title that's in your bulletins again, those acronyms, all of that. I'm going to be like the current White House communications director and circle back to that one at some point. If I were going to rename today's sermon, it would be the most boring sermon in the world. This is a house in Woodland Park, Colorado. It's where I used to live with my family. Weird looking house. As you look at it from the street, you see the two garages and a roof. The windows were on the other sides, the other three sides of the house. So if you look at the house, you can see there's some stairs on the left side, and that is actually our front door, even though it's on the side. We used to come out of that door all of the time. And so one day, Josie, and we didn't park in our garage very much. So one day, Josie came out of that side door, followed by Ben. Josie was about 3 at the time. Ben was 5. He followed her, and I came last because I was locking the door. So as I descended those white steps on the left side, you can see how the sidewalk kind of curves around. So the front of the house is actually obscured from my view. As I descended those steps, an almighty racket was happening in the driveway. I came around to see Josie, 3 years old, neighbor's dog, lips curled back, pit bull, powerful-looking animal, barking at Josie, as if it was about to hurt her. I grabbed the thickest branch I could see next to the sidewalk and walked towards the dog, putting myself between the dog and my kid. I would love to tell you that I wasn't scared. I was very frightened. And then I heard my neighbor calling out to the dog, calling it to come. The dog wouldn't budge an inch, snarling and snapping and growling. Eventually the neighbor came, looking haggard and confused. The dog backed away as he called to it. The neighbor insisted that he wouldn't hurt a fly. You don't need to worry about our dog. The thing is that this was the 3rd time. The previous 2 times the dog had snarled and snapped at me, not my kids. Once in the pitch dark, I came home, I parked in the driveway and got out. The dog had been camped out underneath my wife's car and lunged out at me. The neighbor and I had a few words. But now Josie? Shoot. It was hard to be friends after that. It was hard just to be neighbors. I had no idea how to love this man and his girlfriend. I didn't really want to love them at all. The truth is that everyone, I'm imagining, has got a story like this tucked away from some part of our lives. A difficult neighbor, a combative neighbor, or a disrespectful neighbor, or a loud neighbor. I'm sure here everyone can remember a problematic situation, not just his apple tree shed an apple on her yard, but a really difficult situation that was driving you up the wall. If you want a gloriously detailed accounting of living among difficult people, there is an episode on This American Life called Don't You Be My Neighbor. A small town in Vermont, someone moved in and opened up a gun range on his property. I'm not going to go there all day long today, because after all, this is the most boring sermon ever preached. I was racked with concern years ago about the dogs, about the neighbor, and also, they knew I was a Christian minister. I didn't want my behavior to reflect badly on either me or the church I served. And all I can tell you is that the dog was removed by the neighbor and we hardly ever spoke again. Is that what loving your neighbor looks like? Probably not. But I don't know what I would do if I were back there now and the same thing were to happen. Here's the thing, though, as we ponder these verses. Was Jesus actually talking about his next-door neighbors in these verses when he encouraged us to love our neighbors as we love ourselves? At this point in his life, he didn't actually seem to have any next-door neighbors. We know little about his history of property ownership, and nothing at all about any guidance he gave to others when they asked him, if an apple fell in their yard off the neighbor's tree, whose apple is it? I presume the answer would have been God's, of course, but we don't know for sure. We believe Jesus was born in Bethlehem, raised in Nazareth, moved to Capernaum as an adult, then became an itinerant in the last stage of his life, which is a fancy way of saying he was homeless. Foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to rest his head, he said. Is it helpful or not? I don't know. To hear the definition of the Greek word, plesion. That's the word for neighbor in this verse. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. According to the definition that I found, plesion can mean a neighbor. That's definition 1. 1a is a friend. 1b is any other person where two are concerned that belongs to the same nation or commonwealth as you. 1c, according to Jesus, any other person, irrespective of nation or religion, with whom we live or whom we chance to meet. Anyone whom we chance to meet. Okay, so what does it mean then to love them as yourself? Jesus takes two pieces of scripture, one from Deuteronomy and one from Leviticus, and in effect merges them together into one teaching. He says, love God with everything that you've got. That's the Deuteronomy piece. And then love your neighbor as yourself, which is Leviticus 19:18, which says, you shall not take vengeance or bear any grudge against the children of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The verse is configured to show you what the love of neighbor actually is, which is to refuse to engage in vengeance and grudge bearing. That in effect, if you want to participate in a community of neighborliness, reciprocity has to go out of the window. Tit for tat. You did this, so I do that. You behaved badly, so I did too. You played your music loudly at 2 a.m., so I'll find a way to keep you up when you go to sleep. You expressed something in the language of violence, so I did too. You poured out contempt with all your heart and soul and mind, and so I did too, and on we go. We talked about rehabilitation rather than revenge several weeks ago. We talked about whether it's possible to forgive and love enemies last week. And we're talking about loving your neighbor this week. And in all of those instances, you can't wait for a bulldog to attack your kid or for a neighbor to show up and build a gun range on his property in your serene part of the Green Mountains, or for an apple even to fall in your yard. The work has to be done before that event occurs. Who am I? If I have but one life, who do I want to be? In what ways am I helping to create a better community or neighborhood that puts a halt to reciprocity, that continues the same old problems in the same spiraling fashion? Oh, it sounds easy enough. And I only need to look at my own life to understand just how hard it is to stop engaging in reciprocity. The last 75% of 2020, I didn't shake a single hand. Not one hand. The first memorial service I officiated, when we'd opened up enough to do one in 2021, the funeral home director strode up to me, put out his hand, and I thought, oh man, do I have to? I'd gotten so used to not shaking hands. It's so natural to follow suit, so normal to just do what everyone else is doing. And social psych, the willingness to engage in mimicry is called the interpersonal reactivity index. How likely it is that someone will, often unconsciously, begin to copy the person that they are near. We're familiar enough with this, right? yawn, and someone else will yawn. Tap your finger, someone else will too. Bounce your foot, cross your legs, lean in, lean out, rub your cheek, touch your chin, say something pessimistic, say something in an angry tone, become wide-eyed in amazement at the world, express loving kindness. It's all mimicry. This morning I was walking through the back doors and I said good morning to Bill Amory, and I said, good morning. And he turned to me and he said, hey! And I immediately went, oh, it is good to be alive today. Now I remember. Thanks, Bill. You know how he is. The reason we do all of this mimicry is because it is social glue born out of empathy. Empathic people mimic others in order to help the other person feel comfortable and supported. We pay more attention to the people around us. We see other people, notice their feelings and behaviors and body language, and then we mirror that language. To mirror somebody is to have empathy, to be fully human. And to not mimic the other person, well, you have to have an overriding reason to not participate. Something that is hardwired, conscious, intentional, set. Bill Amory, you know how he is? Because what happened? The first person that sought to shake my hand, I hesitated, and then I gave him knuckles. And then we laughed about it, that I wasn't shaking his hand, I was just showing knuckles. And then 30 seconds later, the next person stuck out their hand, and I thought, okay, and I just shook it. A year of not shaking hands, of actually vowing that I was done with the practice, that I'd not missed colds and bugs and such, that in this new world there had to be a better way to greet one another than sticking out your hand and placing your palm that may or may not have been washed in the last 10 minutes onto the palm of another whose middle name I don't know, whose place of birth is a mystery to me, whose spouse's name is an enigma, and so I definitely don't know whether they washed their hands last. And the pandemic affords one such an opportunity to dwell on these things, and within 1 minute, the old behavior was back, even if I didn't like it very much. Even if I didn't really appreciate my own willingness to compromise my intentions the second it might make someone else feel a touch uncomfortable. So much of the conversation about loving enemies, loving neighbors, rehabilitation rather than revenge, the themes of the past several weeks, has been about difficult, challenging situations. What would you do if you were stuck on a boat with someone you detested? What would you do if you happened to find yourself in Germany in the 1940s? The neighbors with pit bulls. What to do about the prison population? All interesting, fascinating case studies in how we behave. But the dull message, the boring message, the most boring sermon in the world is maybe still salient. What do you do each and every day to nurture a willingness to love your neighbor? Walk, pray, run, breathe, stretch, read, breathe, work well and enough, eat well and enough, centered, reflective, humble, attentive, sociable, still. What you do to nurture a willingness to love your neighbors, all of them, is in fact the hardest thing you will ever do as a human being. And there is no one-stop shopping, unfortunately. You can't pick up a box of loving your neighbor as yourself from ShopRite. Some of it is, in fact, up to you about the kind of person you want to be, and of course, who you choose to imitate. Peace be with you.